The days that followed were heavy with anticipation, each one marked by the gnawing uncertainty of a love both forbidden and divine. Oluwatoyin felt a growing sense of unease, as though her soul was being tugged in opposite directions. Emeka's presence was intoxicating, but the warnings he had given her lingered in her mind. There was a darkness to their bond, one she had ignored in the heat of passion. It wasn't long before the first signs of that darkness began to manifest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Oluwatoyin stood at the window, watching the last light of day fade away. Her mind wandered to Osei. His absence was becoming a more obvious ache, but what disturbed her more was the fact that she didn't feel the weight of guilt that should have accompanied her affair with Emeka. The very thought of Osei, now a distant stranger to her, made her skin prickle. A knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. It was Emeka, his expression unreadable as he stepped into the room. "Good evening," he said, his voice low, like the soft rumble of thunder before a storm. Oluwatoyin barely looked at him, her gaze still lost in the setting sun. "What brings you here tonight?" "I have to warn you," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "There is a price for everything, especially when dealing with powers beyond our understanding." She turned to face him, irritation rising in her chest. "What do you mean? I have done as you asked. I made my wish, and now you are mine." Emeka stepped closer, his eyes dark with the weight of his words. "You cannot control what you do not fully understand. The gods are not mere servants to your desires, Oluwatoyin. What you have called upon will demand more than you are prepared to give." His warning hit her like a slap, and yet she couldn't bring herself to care. The power she felt was too overwhelming, too intoxicating. Emeka's gaze softened as he reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "I don't care," she said, her voice trembling with an emotion she couldn't place. "I need him to love me. I need him to see only me." Emeka's lips tightened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or perhaps something darker, pass through his eyes. "You think this is love?" he asked quietly, taking a step back. "What you've asked for is not love. It is possession. And no one belongs to another person. Not even I." Oluwatoyin opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. The guilt that had once been buried deep inside her began to rise, and she felt something foreign, something darker, settling into her chest. It was a feeling she had never known before, and it terrified her. Emeka turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused. "I will be here when you come to your senses," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As he left, the silence in the room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in around her. Her heart raced, the full weight of her actions crashing over her. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the presence of something ancient and untamed. She could feel the pull of the gods, their eyes watching her every move. And though she had once been sure of her decision, now, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The days that followed were marked by a deep, unsettling quiet. Oluwatoyin's life seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. Emeka's warnings echoed in her ears, and she began to feel a change, both within herself and around her. Her every step felt heavier, like she was walking on a ground that no longer belonged to her. Osei, sensing the growing tension between them, began to press her with questions. His once indifferent attitude had transformed into something sharper, more vigilant. "Where have you been?" he asked one evening as she returned home late from yet another meeting with Emeka. "Out," she replied curtly, avoiding his gaze. "Out where?" Osei persisted, his voice rising with suspicion. "You are not the woman I married, Oluwatoyin. What has happened to you?" The accusation in his voice hit her harder than she had expected. For a brief moment, guilt flashed through her, but she pushed it away, too consumed by her desire for Emeka to feel it fully. "I'm still your wife, Osei," she said, her tone hardening. "But I can't live in this cage anymore. I need more. I need to feel something real." Osei's eyes widened with shock, the hurt in them unmistakable. "And you think Emeka can give you that?" he spat. "You think he can make you feel whole?" Oluwatoyin didn't respond, her chest tight with the weight of her own betrayal. But Osei's words cut through her defenses. His pain, the rawness of his emotions, seeped through, and for the first time, she saw him, not just as her husband, but as a man who had once loved her with everything he had. And just like that, a crack appeared in her heart. But it was too late. She had already crossed a line she could never return from. The night of the IV ritual arrived. Emeka had invited her to his home once again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The air was thick with the sound of chanting, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through her bones. The room was dimly lit by candles, casting long shadows on the walls, and at the center of the room stood the altar. It was the night she had been waiting for, when she would fully bind Emeka to her, when her wish would be fulfilled. But as she stood there, her eyes drawn to the figure of Ania, the goddess of love, her heart began to race. She felt a tightness in her chest, as though something, or someone, was watching her. Emeka stood beside her, his hands gently brushing her skin as he began to chant softly in a language she didn't understand. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of dizziness through her, but she fought it, focusing instead on the ritual at hand. "Speak your desire once more," Emeka urged, his voice steady. "Say the words that will seal your fate." Oluwatoyin closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the chant in her blood, the power of the earth beneath her feet. She whispered the same words she had spoken before, only this time, they felt different, darker, more desperate. "I want him to love me. I want him to see only me, to desire only me. I want him to belong to me." As the last word left her lips, a sharp gust of wind blew through the room, and the candles flickered. She opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. The goddess Onia seemed to come alive in the flickering light, her eyes glowing with a strange intensity. But then, a shift in the air, a deep, resonant crack, and the world around her tilted. Emeka staggered back, his face contorted in pain. "No," he whispered, as though he had seen something terrible. "You've gone too far." The room trembled with the force of the wind that had swept through. The flickering candles cast eerie shadows across the walls, their once warm glow now tinged with something colder, more unsettling. Oluwatoyin stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat, as she watched Emeka stagger back, clutching his chest. His face twisted in pain, and the once soothing presence he carried was now a mere shadow of its former self. "What have you done?" Emeka's voice cracked, his words heavy with disbelief. The air around them thickened, growing dense with an unfamiliar energy. It felt oppressive, like the very room was suffocating them. The altar seemed to pulse, its candles flickering violently, as if the spirit of Onia herself was protesting. Oluwatoyin's chest tightened, panic beginning to seep through her veins. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Emeka's gaze shifted to the altar, and then to her, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and fear. "You've crossed a line, Oluwatoyin," he said, each word filled with finality. "This isn't just about love anymore. You've taken something that belongs to the spirits, something that cannot be undone." Oluwatoyin's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard the warnings, but in the heat of her desire, she had ignored them, thinking love was the only thing that mattered. She had asked for him to love her, only her. But now, she could feel the consequences of that wish beginning to unravel. Emeka dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as if trying to steady himself. His body seemed to ripple with energy, as if it were no longer his own. The room seemed to sway around her, and the walls closed in. "Onia is angry," Emeka gasped, his voice strained. "You've summoned her wrath." The realization hit Oluwatoyin like a physical blow. Onia wasn't just a deity of love, she was a force of balance, of harmony. And in her attempt to claim Emeka's heart, Oluwatoyin had disturbed the delicate equilibrium of the world, invoking powers she didn't fully understand. As Emeka struggled to stand, the lights dimmed to near darkness. The only illumination now came from the faint, flickering glow of the candles. She could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, watching her. The air grew thick with a weight of unseen eyes, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to pulse, as though the earth itself was alive. Then, in a voice that wasn't quite his own, Emeka spoke again, his words rasping, his body trembling with the strain. "Oluwatoyin, you've bound yourself to me, but you've also bound yourself to something darker, something that will never let you go." A cold shiver ran down her spine as the room seemed to expand and contract. A strange, hollow sound echoed through the space, as if the walls themselves were speaking, the voices of the spirits rising in chorus. The shadows grew longer, and she felt a creeping sensation in the pit of her stomach. "What do you mean?" she whispered, taking a step back, her voice barely audible. Emeka's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror, as though he could see something beyond her, something she couldn't. "It's not just love you've summoned. You've summoned possession, obsession. You've bound yourself to me in ways I can't explain." The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. It was as if the spirits of the earth, the gods themselves, had decided to make their presence known. Oluwatoyin's pulse quickened. She felt a suffocating pressure in her chest, as if the air itself were growing heavier. She was drowning in it, unable to breathe, unable to escape the oppressive force surrounding her. "You must undo it," Emeka gasped, his voice cracking with desperation. "You must break the spell, or you will never be free." But it was too late. The bond she had created, one forged in the heat of passion and desperation, was now a chain that bound her not just to Emeka, but to something far greater than herself. She could feel it now, coursing through her veins, like a river of darkness pulling her deeper into its currents. The following days were a blur of confusion and mounting dread. Oluwatoyin's life had turned upside down. She could no longer tell where the boundaries of her own mind began and where they ended. Emeka was no longer just a man, he was a tether to a world she had never understood, a world of spirits, gods, and ancient forces that existed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to claim what was theirs. She couldn't bring herself to face Osei. The guilt of her actions, the betrayal, the broken marriage, had taken on a new shape, one that gnawed at her insides. She had destroyed everything she had once known for a love that now seemed cursed, a love that was never meant to be hers. And yet, there was no turning back. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emeka's face. Every time she breathed, she felt his presence beside her, even though he wasn't physically there. It was as if her very being was being consumed by him, by the desire she had conjured, and by the spirit that she had unwittingly awakened. It wasn't just Emeka anymore. The forces she had disturbed had begun to take hold of her thoughts, her dreams, her every waking moment. They whispered to her in the darkness, calling her to a world she wasn't ready for, a world that would never let her go. And then, one night, as she lay awake in bed, her mind spiraling with fear and regret, she heard the whisper, "You belong to me now." The voice was soft, like a caress, but there was nothing gentle about it. It was the voice of Onia, and in that moment, Oluwatoyin realized the depth of her mistake. She had not just sought to possess Emeka's heart, she had made herself a slave to the very forces she had tried to control. The next day, Oluwatoyin went to Emeka's hut again, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She couldn't live like this. Not anymore. She had to undo whatever she had done, whatever had been set into motion that night. But Emeka was not there. Instead, she found an old woman sitting at the altar. She was bent with age, her face wrinkled, but her eyes gleamed with the knowledge of things unseen. "Where is Emeka?" Oluwatoyin demanded, her voice shaking with the fear that had been creeping into her soul. The old woman looked up at her, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. "He is gone, child," she said softly. "Emeka cannot help you anymore." Oluwatoyin's heart dropped to her stomach. "Gone? What do you mean? He must help me. I need him." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she shook her head. "It's too late. The forces you've summoned are beyond his reach. They are in you now, and there is no undoing what has been done." Oluwatoyin staggered back, her mind reeling. "What do I do then? Tell me what I must do." The old woman stood slowly, her voice low and steady. "There is only one way to break the bond, but it will come at a great cost. You must give up what you cherish most, your love for Emeka. You must let it go, or else you will be consumed by it." Oluwatoyin stood in stunned silence, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. But deep down, she knew what she had to do. She had to choose between the love that had consumed her and the life she had once known. But was she strong enough to make that choice?